Okay, so my name's Alison McLean. I'm one of the clinical geneticists and I work at the Westmead Amyloidosis Clinic. I can appreciate I am the person standing between you and morning tea right now, so I will be quick and we're a bit behind schedule as well. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about genetic testing in TTR amyloidosis in particular. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the basics of genetics, talk about what is genetic testing, why we do it, who do we test, how do we test, and what happens if you are positive. I'm sorry if I'm going to whip through all of this so we can stay to time. So if some of you have seen me in clinic, you might be aware of the basics of genetics, but I'm going to run through it because I think it's important for everyone. So this diagram here is a picture of a cell, and in the cell is the nucleus. Now cells are building blocks in our bodies. They're like the bricks in the house. And cells have to do different things. You know, they've got to make hair, teeth, eyes, depending on what they do. And genes provide those instructions to the cell. We have 20,000 genes in our body that we know of, and I like to think of them like books in a library. So we have 20,000 books in our library, that makes who we are, and they're stored across chromosomes. This is a picture of chromosomes, and so chromosomes are like the bookshelves. And people have often heard of chromosomes because biologically male individuals have an XY and biologically female individuals have an XX. But we actually have, let me go back. We actually have 23 pairs of chromosomes, with the sex chromosomes only making up one pair. So we inherit one copy of each chromosome from mum and one copy from dad. And you can see here, this is how our genes are spelt. They're like letters in a book. And so spelling errors can occur in these instructions, which means that the error or how you make a protein, there's an error in how it goes. So I'll use an example because it was Anzac Day recently. I don't know if anyone made Anzac biscuits, but you have to add oats. That seems pretty reasonable. But say there was a spelling error and suddenly you had to add coats or boats, you're probably not going to make up biscuits anymore, are you? And so that just shows the impact of one letter change in a recipe. And that's the same thing that can happen in a cell as well. So you can have one single spelling mistake and it can cause a lot of problems for the cell and how it reads the instruction book. So hereditary TTR amyloidosis is where we find a causative gene change. And there is often a family history, or there's often a speculative family history. So we see people who think, actually maybe one of my parents did have this condition, but sometimes they're not available anymore for testing. They've passed away or are overseas, for example, so it's a bit speculative. Or it can actually occur for the first time in an individual, and that's called de novo, and new genetic changes do occur regularly. And some ethnic backgrounds do have more common genetic changes, and some of them are seen in amyloidosis as well. But just a shout out to the other non-TTR hereditary amyloidosis for any of those individuals in this room that may be affected by that, but also because I'm a specialist in rare disease. But there are actually a few other causes of hereditary amyloidosis where there are changes in genes which are leading to the problem that is not just TTR. So who do we test? So we test in individuals to diagnose them with the genetic form of amyloidosis. So that's an individual who has symptoms, and we'll do testing to say, is this genetic or is this not genetic? And then the other type of testing we do, which is quite unique to genetics, is we test the family members of those people with a genetic condition that do not have symptoms. And that's called predictive testing. And what we're doing is we're just testing them for the known spelling mistake in their family. We're not doing broad testing. We're saying you have this single spelling mistake change in your parent. Let's see if you have it, but you don't have any symptoms. So what is genetic testing? So it's a blood test. We send it to a lab in New South Wales. And unfortunately, it can take some months for the result to come back. And that's because we have to take the DNA out, it has to be read, and then it has to be looked at by multiple scientists. And it just is a laborious process, unfortunately. But it is getting faster. It is free through the public clinics, and depending on how you are referred, you might get just TTR tested, or you might have testing as part of a broader panel when someone is investigating whether you have what is the cause of your nerve disease or your heart disease or your kidney disease. And it's often included in other bigger panels, which can be covered by Medicare. Why do we do testing? Because we want to confirm the cause of the amyloidosis, and that helps us understand what treatment options are available for individuals that do have a hereditary form. And also, the really important thing is genetics is it allows us to then test your family members. It allows us to screen family members early, and so they don't have to go through the diagnostic odyssey that the first family member went through. So you saw those slides before where it can take years. And like I've seen people in my clinic that take 60 years to get a diagnosis. And what we try to do is then avoid people going through this diagnostic odyssey. So when they start presenting with symptoms, they're ahead of the curve because we already know what the diagnosis is in them. How do we test? So if we're doing a diagnostic test to look for the cause of your signs and symptoms, we do a single blood test. And it is just a blood test. I think people do wonder about how we do genetic testing, but it can be done off blood. But predictive testing is slightly different, and we take 2 blood tests, and that's because someone doesn't have symptoms. So we need to be sure that we are going to give them a diagnosis based off a single blood test. So when it's diagnostic, we say, okay, let's look at your nerve studies, your echo, all of those things, and the gene test, and we put it all together. But we give people in predictive testing a diagnosis of a single test, which is a genetic test. We do it twice. It has to be at 2 separate times, and that's to reduce internal lab error to make sure we get the diagnosis right. Not because as medical professionals we like to take bloods off you, which I'm sure you probably think is the case. We don't, but that's we just want to be sure for this diagnosis. And again, we have to go through a specific consent form, and you can scan that QR code there if you want a link to patient fact sheets on videos on genomic testing. And the reason why it's slightly different is because when we do a genetic test, we're not just testing you. It has implications for other family members, and people need to be aware of what those are and how that's going to impact your family and how you're going to be able to communicate and disseminate that result with other family members. And so if you are positive, we'll go through the inheritance pattern of amyloidosis. So it's inherited in an autosomal dominant fashion. That's mean if you have a genetic change, each of your children are a 1 in 2 or 50% chance of inheriting that from you. We provide you with a family letter, so that allows you to take this letter and pass it on to your family members wherever they may be in the world, so that they can show up to a local doctor and say, this is the diagnosis in my family, and then they can contact us and we can provide them with the results so that testing can happen. And genetic services are very good at coordinating across the world genetic testing for family members. It also allows us to provide you with something that takes the burden off communicating that within families, because there are a lot of complex family dynamics. We discuss the different management. If you don't have any symptoms, then we do screening. We discuss the timing of the screening, and also lots of different treatment options that might be available specifically for people with variant or hereditary amyloidosis. And sometimes particular gene changes, so that's called your genotype, have particular set of symptoms associated with them. So some can be more associated with nerve disease and some can be more associated with cardiac disease, and we can talk through that. But the complicating factor is not everyone that has the gene change will necessarily get symptoms. So it can be a bit, for those we've done predictive testing in, a bit unsure to know, well, will you ever get symptoms in the future? And we can't predict that, unfortunately. And just to finish off, these are some genetic-specific resources for anyone that would like more information, is the Centre for Genetics Education and also the Genetics Alliance Australia. And I'm going to finish there because I know that we've got to get to morning tea and our next session has to start on time. So I understand that morning tea is out here and we have 10 minutes, and I apologise for that. And you can bring the food in for the next session, which starts at 10:05. Thank you very much for your time.